Welcome back to another episode of the History of Fan Anime. I'm your host, Chow. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about our favorite video games across different consoles and any special memories that we have about these different consoles when we owned them. And again, this started from a conversation I had at work, and we just started talking about our how we grew up with video games and what video games were really significant to us over all the different consoles that we had. So I want to go through my sort of history of video games and consoles and that kind of stuff, and some stories about them. And and then basically, if you like, you can put your stories about these various different games. Do you agree with some of the games that are on the list? Do you also have a similar story? Put that in the comments below, and that'd be great. Before we begin, don't forget to go down below, click like, and click subscribe. But about 60% of you are already subscribed, and I really appreciate that. And again, hopefully the rest of you, I hope I've earned your subscription, and you go hit that red button, subscribe, and also maybe click that notification bell, because obviously YouTube is starting to get better on recommending my videos now. But for the mass majority, you won't know when I release videos until you get that notification ring. All right. I'm going to pull up the list of popular video games, and then I'm going to sort of go through them, as well as add my own stories and my own games as well. So you do that in the comments below for that too. All right. So without further delay, let's begin. Okay, so the first console I'm going to talk about is the Atari 2600. Now, I was first, I never actually owned an Atari 2600 in the initial beginning. I remember my neighbor, Marty, just across the alley. He was one of the first people that I remember he had the Atari. And I remember he brought that over one time, and we were playing that a lot. And I'd always go over to his house, and we'd play it over there. And the games that we played all the time would be obviously the combat cartridge that it came with. Again, we played it a lot, but I wasn't very good at it. Like the tank battle and the airplane battle, we played those often. But I just couldn't. I could never get the hang of actually shooting and then controlling the shot during the movement. And again, Mario got really good at doing that, and so he'd always win. And but I remember spending hours on hours playing that. The other games that come really to mind are things like Pac-Man and Space Invaders, Donkey Kong, Frogger, Asteroids, all those, and Defender even, right? All those are games I remember were really, really big in the arcade, right? I remember, for example, Asteroids. Me and Marty would be like going to the rushing really quickly to the Stedmans in the shopping mall, like on the way to school, on the way back from school, right? We'd leave school as soon as we could, to get there to Stedman's. Almost never would we ever get there in time. Always someone, there would always be a lineup by the time we get there. But we were content to just stand there and watch and wait, wait in line for people, and just endlessly watch people play Asteroids. And it was really, really, fixating. And then either that or we go to the arcade, and I love playing things like Frogger and Defender. That was a really hard game that we never really get into, except whenever we get into some of those cheat codes where we try to pick up a bunch of guys and take them to the star to the portal, like Stargate or whatever, right? We love to do that. Again, the games are really good in the arcade, but on the Atari 2600 they sucked, right? Because the graphics were really bad and everything else, like compared to what it was in the arcade. That's especially the case of Mrs. Pac-Man and Pac-Man, right? Really good in the arcade, but really horrible in this system. So I didn't really spend a lot of time playing them on there. But yeah, definitely, for me, most of the memories come from that combat cartridge that came with the Atari. The next system that I encountered when I was a kid was the Intellivision. Now, again, I never owned an Intellivision, but the neighbor Joel had one And he lived down the street. He was our newspaper boy. And yeah, I remember going to his house multiple times, and we'd play different various games. Now again, the resolution on the ColecoVision was better than the Atari, and the games that they had were closer to what the arcade was, closer than the Atari renditions, right? And so I thought the graphics were better. The game that I really liked to play was Gorf. Although, unlike the arcade, the controller wasn't as easy to run and manipulate than obviously the arcade version. So it didn't play quite the same, but in concept it was close enough, right? So I remember playing lots and lots of that whenever the Joel's place. The other one I remember playing lots of game was the boxing game, but the boxing game was just too. It was too. It was too hard to play with the pad and stuff. Because I remember with the boxing, you would end up putting that the little overlay over the keyboard, right? And then you'd have to press the punch and this and that stuff. And I remember certain buttons would just be totally worn off. Like I mean, I think I got to the point where the little slip-on plastic keypad the overlay, like some of the buttons were like just totally worn through that, so you couldn't even read the what the word on the overlay was. It was just the raw button that you were pressing. So obviously that's the one that you press all the time, so you just keep going, heavy punch or whatever that is. And so yeah, definitely the boxing a lot. Gorf was definitely a big thing. Yeah, I think I played a little more actions, but not as not as much. I think again just because it wasn't the joystick was just uncommon for that system at that particular time. Again, as I mentioned, asteroids was a big thing, but of course they didn't have an asteroid. The closest game they had at that time was Astro Smash, and I remember it was, that's just a mindless game of like asteroids just constantly falling on you, and you just gotta, shoot, just shoot them. And it was, as I said, not the same kind of concept as the asteroids in the arcade. So, I'd play that, but after playing, that for like hours on end, as I said, it's just a total mindless game. Then that's kind of, that sort of feeling of playing it just sort of passed. But other than that, yeah, I think the only other game I really liked was that sea battle, or that air sea battle one, where you control different like things of your fleet. You had, I think you had an aircraft carrier, you had a sub, you had a battleship or whatever, and again, I wasn't very good at it, but I thought that was a pretty interesting concept for that type of game at that time. And so I'd play it. Of course, I would never beat Joel because I said he had so much practice on that. But I still thought it was a pretty fun game anyway. Okay, so the first actual video game console slash computer that I actually got was the Apple II computer. And unlike everyone else in my sort of local group at that particular time, I was the only one that actually had an Apple II computer. My neighbors, close to me didn't have any of that kind of stuff. Even my close neighbor, Trish, had a TSR-80 computer. But by comparison, I was the most sort of advanced in that stuff. And again, I started, that's sort of where my collecting addiction sort of started. I just started getting software from all over the place and all different types of utilities and games and that kind of stuff. And so, what was it for me? I look at this list, and yeah, sure, a lot of these games were really, really, pivotal. Ultima, I remember, we played that one, continuously. And that was probably one of those first games I really actually started, completing the quest for. Again, I played it because it was it was one of the games that I liked and went through, but definitely not. I wouldn't say it number one. I think I played Wizardry more than I played Ultima. Castle Wolfenstein, that one had a special place in my heart because I remember, we used to get computer time um, um, at the high school, Lakewood Junior Secondary, and I remember we would we'd spend endless nights using our computer time, and instead of doing any programming and that stuff, we played Wolfenstein, and it was just just it's so satisfying playing that game. And I remember the secret hack cheat that we had at the time is that the game ran off a floppy drive, right? Because there wasn't enough memory space in the computer to hold the entire game. So every time you left the room to go into the next room, it has to go to the floppy drive to load the data. So if you died, what would happen is that you'd immediately reach out and flick the drive door on the floppy drive, so it would prevent the game from writing the game status, like the fact that that you died in this particular room, on the disk, right? So then therefore you could reboot the game, and then you can go resume game, and it would resume the game as if you entered that room from the beginning, and before you alerted the SS guys or whatever. That was the big thing. And I remember it was just so many times we would be able to complete the game and that kind of stuff, just going and playing that. It was really satisfying to play that game. So yeah, definitely Wolfenstein was good. Again, Wizardry was a big one. I remember it was Nibble magazine had published a Wizardry editor, so you can edit the stats. And I remember I spent countless times just sitting there typing it all in from the book to make this editor, and to make modifications to it so that it would do different things. But yeah, that was like a really really satisfying thing, a satisfying game to play, especially doing. I think that was the first time we actually did speed runs. Like I remember, we'd get our party in, we'd teleport to level 10, we'd have the number of steps mapped out. So it was like you go 10 steps this way, you turn right, you go 10 steps in this way, you beat this guy, and then then you go down, and then you meet up with Weirdna, and you tilt away to them, and then you get all his treasure, and then you teleport all the way back up, and then you just keep doing that particular sequence, and you just rank up all this money and your experience points. It's just it was just a kind of a power, it was almost like a power run, and it was a way to kind of speed run this particular level, and just hack lots of money and that kind of stuff. You could just use the editor and do that. But I remember we made it almost like a meme, as it were, to do that. Choplifter was fun, especially with the gore cheat in it. That was extremely well thought of game. Swashbuckler was alright. No one really thought. Lode Runner was pretty popular. I didn't really care too much about that one. King's Quest was a really big game. I didn't really like that style of game, but I know that we played a lot of that. Those Sierra Online types of games. I think I was probably more interested. I think of any of that kind of stuff. I think I like like things like Zork a little bit more. Especially Zork 1, 2, and 3. They were hard games. I think the one I enjoyed the most was StarCraft. Spacecraft, Space Quest, something like that. That one I thought was really nice. Karateka. Well, I think that was the first, sort of, fighting kind of, game with a story, that they had, and it was, it was pretty fun. Dude, they should have made more for that. I think that would have been good. I know Bard's Hill was fun to play with, but I think Wizardry was still better. Same with Might and Magic. I thought that it was a good change. Closer to D&D, but again, I think Wizardry still had it hands down. I think even more than Ultima, I think Wizardry still had it hands down. The best system of that sort of thing, even though the graphics weren't as good. I remember, California Games. I remember that was the first sort of Olympic game one that we, played a lot of, and tried these stupid things with, like, the pole jump, and just you know, because I remember, again, we again, when we had those days where, we're at school, and we booked that computer time. Sometimes we boot up California Games so that, we could challenge the other people to see, how fast they could do the events and that kind of stuff. So we always thought that was fun. Now, this is the top 20 the games that, came out with this particular thing. But games that I remember that also were really, really significant for me, and for the Apple II, is I was a really big strategic fan. So SSI games and stuff like that were really, really big. And I remember, we got into some of the games. Like, I remember North Atlantic '86, War in Russia, and Battle of the Bulge. I remember getting into those things, and it was just so much fun playing those ones because you know what historically should happen, and statistically, how the game should progress, right? So, for example, I remember War in Russia. I had built this special, the menu went through from 1 to 7, and then I reprogrammed option 8 and option 9 on it. Option 8 was, heal all your units, and number 9 was heal all your units and bring your attrition down to 0, right? Or your logistics supply, fatigue down to 0. So basically, what happens is when you're playing the Germans and you're attacking Russia, and your infantry and your and your panzer units are just rolling over the Russian units, and then basically when you're at at the gates of Moscow and Leningrad and Stalingrad and all that kind of stuff, right? You're supposed to suffer from fatigue and long supply lines and all that kind of stuff, right? And supply logistic issues, right? So you can, and of course you've taken lots of damage getting there. So if you hit, like, the hidden button 8, all of a sudden all your damage is gone, and then you can continue fighting again. But so, or you hit 9, and so basically you would get into to the Moscow. The Russian winter would arrive, but then so when the Russians made their counterattack, they'd be like hitting a brick wall, because you've all your all your all your panzer units and all your infantry units are now back up to 100% health, and there's no supply issues, right? So everyone's attacking or defending at full capacity. So they're just getting smushed, and it's just so fun playing that. Anyway, so so a lot of the SSI games were really, really big for me. And another game that we always had fun playing was Leisure Suit Larry, because again, this is one of those games that just sort of started. I mean, obviously, that had more entertainment value than, like, was it Softcore Adventure or something like that. Similar idea, but definitely, the Leisure Suit Larry was just hilarious to play. Anyway, so that was my sort of big experience with the Apple IIs. And again, because I speak a little bit longer on that, because that was really the first system that I really, really got interested into, because that was really the first one for me. I think the only other one that I would probably add on to this is Aquatron. That was sort of like like a Defender, and I thought that one was really, really well done, and I loved playing that a lot. I also remember playing Battlezone, the tank game, because I think this was the first time that an arcade game like that was really playable like the arcade game, because it's even though the Apple II joystick isn't the same as the two paddles that you get in the arcade, but this controllability and playability was like unmatched at that time. And so I remember spending so much time playing that particular game. I really, really liked it. Asteroids. This is also the first system that the Asteroids was actually somewhat realistically playable. Rather than using the Atari joystick or that kind of stuff. Actual AS, and then the arrow keys for left, right, thrust and fire was actually doable. Sometimes with that with the new version of Asteroid, you had the space bar for like shields or something like that, but or hyperspace at that time. Um, but yeah, I mean, I would spend like so much time playing those games just because those were the first sort of real arcade games that were really playable on the Apple. Tempest was another one. Again, I remember they had the joy paddles that allowed you to play that game really well. Again, the one problem was that you couldn't keep spinning the joystick, the paddle on one way, because you would eventually hit the end of the paddle when because the paddle can only go from 0 to 255, and so if you keep going, it'll hit the end of going in that direction. So then you had to go back in the opposite direction. You couldn't spin it freely like the one that you get in the arcade, right? So but yeah, I thought that was really really nice. But yeah, those are sort of the main games that I would remember as playing a heck of a lot of when doing things. And there's probably more, but yeah, definitely those are the top ones that come right to mind. I hope you had a kind of fun and a little blast from the past. And don't forget, I'll be doing more kind of episodes where I bring out some pictures and more merchandise and collectible stuff from that past era. Okay, so until next time, see you again.